The news hit the Galactic Council like a physical blow. No species had declared open war in over 3,000 cycles. The very idea of it had become something close to mythology, a dark chapter from ancient history that civilized beings had moved past forever. And now the youngest, loudest, most unpredictable species in the galaxy had torn that history wide open. High Arbiter Solon called an emergency session within hours. The assembly chamber on the axis of Accord was packed. Delegates who had not attended a session in years were suddenly present, their faces, or whatever passed for faces among their kind, showing various shades of shock, anger, and fear. The Dravari delegate Gorath slammed his massive fist on his console, and declared that humanity had proven itself unworthy as civilization. The Aluran contingent called for immediate economic sanctions. Several smaller species quietly began recalling their ambassadors from Earth. The chamber was a storm of raised voices and clicking mandibles and rumbling growls, all of it aimed at the empty seats where the human delegation usually sat. Ambassador Kevin Park had not left the station. He was still there, in his quarters, fielding dozens of messages from angry, confused, and frightened delegates. To each one, he gave the same calm response. Humanity did not seek this conflict. We asked for your help, and you declined. We respect the Council's principles, but we will not sacrifice our people on the altar of your patience. Most delegates did not know what to do with that answer. A few were quietly impressed by it. One, however, sought Kevin out in person. The Teresi were one of the oldest species in the Council, older even than the Aluran. They were a quiet people who rarely spoke in open sessions and never involved themselves in political disputes. Their representative, a wizened figure named Duan, found Kevin in a corridor between sessions. Duan studied the human ambassador with large, dark eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. Your people know what war truly costs, Duan said. It was not a question. Kevin met his gaze. Better than anyone on this station. Duan tilted his head in a slow gesture of acknowledgement. The Council believes that war is always the worst choice, that it serves no purpose, that it is madness. And what do the Teresi believe? Kevin asked. Duan was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We believe that sometimes the worst choice and the right choice are the same thing. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Kevin standing alone in the corridor with the echo of that thought. Meanwhile, Earth was moving with a speed that stunned the galaxy. Within 5 days, the United Earth Defense Command had assembled a war fleet of over 300 vessels. They were not the most advanced ships in the galaxy. The Council had made sure of that by limiting the technology available to provisional members. But they were solid, well-armed, and crewed by men and women who had trained for exactly this kind of moment, even though most of them had never truly believed it would come. The fleet ranged from massive dreadnoughts, like the Valor of Cincinnati and the Iron Promise, down to sleek destroyer packs and carrier groups loaded with fighter wings. Admiral Nate Caldwell took personal command from the bridge of the flagship, a heavy battleship called the Endurance. His second-in-command was Captain Megan Holt, a tactical officer who had spent years writing combat doctrines during peacetime simulations that everyone around her had treated as academic exercises. The simulations are one thing, Caldwell told her, as the fleet formed up near the edge of the Sol system. The Vraxians have been fighting border wars for centuries. They know what real combat looks like. Megan Holt was a lean woman with short dark hair and steady hands that never seemed to shake, no matter the situation. She looked at him with calm, clear eyes. Then we learn fast, sir. That's what humans do. The fleet departed Sol in 3 waves. As they crossed into open space, they passed an orbital checkpoint maintained by the Council's border monitors, the Peacekeeper Corps. The Corps had been designed to police trade disputes, and chase smugglers. It had never been built to stop a full military mobilization, and its officers knew it. The peacekeeper commander at the checkpoint was a Kethra officer named Victa. She sent a single transmission to the approaching fleet. "Human fleet, you are in violation of Council Statute 9. Power down your weapons and return to your home system." Admiral Caldwell responded personally. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "Peacekeeper Victa, we hear you. We intend no hostility toward any Council species. Our fight is with the Vraxian Dominion, who murdered 22,000 of our civilians. We are going to get an answer for that. You are welcome to observe." There was a long silence on the channel. Then Victa's voice returned, quieter than before. "Understood, Admiral. We will observe." As the fleet moved deeper into open space, Caldwell studied the star charts in his ready room aboard the Endurance. The Vraxian border was 9 days away at fleet speed. 9 days to prepare his crews for something none of them had ever done. 9 days to turn 300 ships full of trained but untested sailors into a fighting force. He called his senior captains together via holographic conference. There were 40 of them, men and women of various ages, backgrounds, and temperaments, all of them looking at him with a mixture of determination and something that might have been fear, though none of them would have admitted it. "I am not going to pretend this will be easy," Caldwell told them. "The Vraxians outnumber us, and they have more experience in actual combat than we do. But here is what we have that they do not." He paused and looked around the room. "We have 3,000 years of military history to draw from. Every tactic, every strategy, every lesson learned from every war humanity has ever fought, all of that is in our heads and in our training. The Vraxians are predators. They know one way to fight: charge hard, hit hard, overwhelm. We know 100 ways to fight, and we are going to use every single one of them." The captains listened. Some nodded, some were quiet. All of them left that meeting with something burning in their chests that had not been there before. 3 days from the Vraxian border, long-range sensors on the Endurance picked up something that made every officer on the bridge sit up straight. A Vraxian war fleet, nearly 500 ships strong, was moving to intercept them. The Vraxians had not expected a military response from the humans. They had expected outrage, protests, maybe some economic pressure through the Council. But they were not fools, and when they realized what was coming, they had assembled the largest battle fleet their Dominion could muster on short notice. Captain Holt studied the sensor data on her pad, running numbers and projections with the focus of a surgeon examining a patient. "They outnumber us roughly 5-3, she said. "Their heavy cruisers have stronger forward shields than anything we have. In a straight-up fight, nose to nose, they will grind us down." Caldwell leaned back in his chair. "What about their flanks?" Holt paused. She looked up from her pad, and for the first time since the campaign began, there was the faintest trace of a smile on her face. "Weak," she said. "Their ships are built for head-on charges. Classic Predator thinking. All the armor in front, not much on the sides. They expect their enemies to either run or meet them face to face." Caldwell nodded slowly. A plan was forming in his mind. Something very old. Something that a general on Earth had used over 2,000 years ago against an army that also liked to charge straight ahead. "Then we do not fight them head-on," he said. He opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships, this is the Admiral. The enemy is ahead of us, and they are strong. But strength without cleverness is just weight, and weight can be moved. I need every captain to listen carefully, because what we are about to do has not been done in a very long time. But it has been done before, and it worked. Here is the plan." The fleet slowed, reformed, and split into 3 groups. The largest group, led by Captain Holt, would form the center and advance toward the Vraxians directly. The two smaller groups, each about 60 ships, would swing wide and use a nearby asteroid field to hide their approach. The idea was simple in concept and terrifyingly difficult in execution. Holt's center group would engage the Vraxians, fort them hard enough to look like a real threat, and then pull back, drawing the enemy forward into a long chase. Once the Vraxians had committed to the pursuit and stretched their formation thin, the two flanking groups would hit them from the sides, where their armor was weakest. It was the same trap that Hannibal had set for the Romans at Cannae. The question was whether it would work in the cold vacuum of space, against ships instead of soldiers, in 3 dimensions instead of 2. Admiral Caldwell stood on the bridge of the Endurance and watched the fleet move into position. In a few hours, humanity would fight its first battle against an alien enemy. He thought about the 22,000 dead on Haven's Rest. He thought about the men and women aboard every ship in his fleet, each one somebody's son or daughter. He thought about what President Hale had said. We choose war. Now it was time to see what that choice would cost. The Battle of the Kisara approach began at 4 in the morning, Standard Time. The stars were cold and silent, as they always were, but the space between them was about to become something else entirely. Captain Megan Holt led the center force aboard the cruiser Steadfast. 87 ships advanced in a tight formation toward the Vraxian line, their weapons powered and their shields raised. On every bridge, in every gun turret, in every fighter cockpit, human hearts were beating fast. Most of these people had trained for years. None of them had ever fired a weapon at a living target. The Vraxian fleet spread across the darkness ahead of them like a wall of angry metal. Nearly 500 ships, led by a warlord named Thren, who had spent his entire life fighting border wars and had never lost a major engagement. Thren looked at the smaller human force approaching him and saw exactly what he expected to see. A young species throwing itself against a superior enemy out of emotion rather than sense. He ordered a full charge. The Vraxian fleet surged forward, their heavy cruisers leading the way with plasma batteries already firing. The first shots crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds, and the human line shuddered under the impact. 3 human destroyers were crippled in the first 10 minutes. The Steadfast took a direct hit to its port side that carved a glowing wound along the hull. On the bridge, sparks rained from the ceiling, and the deck shook so hard that several officers were thrown from their seats. Megan Holt gripped her command chair with both hands and kept her voice level. "Hold the line," she said. "All ships, return fire, but maintain formation. Do not break. I repeat, do not break." The human ships fired back with railgun salvos and missile barrages. Enough to hurt the Vraxians, enough to draw blood, but not enough to slow their advance. To Thren, watching from his flagship, it looked like the humans were brave, but overmatched. They were fighting hard, but they could not stop what was coming. Then Holt gave the order that changed everything. All center ships, execute tactical withdrawal. Fall back on bearing 270, controlled retreat. Keep firing as you go. The center force pulled back in good order, their guns still blazing. The Vraxians saw their enemy retreating and did what predators always do. They gave chase. Thren pushed his fleet forward, his heavy cruisers racing ahead while his lighter escorts struggled to keep up. The Vraxian formation, which had started as a broad wall, stretched into a long, narrow column as the faster ships outpaced the slower ones. This was exactly what Caldwell had been counting on. 12 minutes into the pursuit, the flanking group struck. 120 human ships emerged from the asteroid field on the left side of the Vraxian formation. At the same moment, another 120 appeared on the right. They came in fast and hard, pouring railgun fire and torpedo spreads into the thin side armor of the Vraxian cruisers. The effect was immediate and terrible. Vraxian ships that had been designed to take punishment from the front were suddenly being torn apart from the sides. Explosions bloomed along the length of the enemy column like a chain of firecrackers. Armor plating that could stop a direct frontal assault crumbled like paper under the flanking fire. Thren realized what had happened almost instantly, but it was too late. His fleet was strung out over thousands of kilometers, his ships committed to a chase that had just become a trap. He screamed orders to regroup, to turn, to form a defensive circle, but the human fire was too heavy and too precise. His captains could not maneuver fast enough. Captain Holt reversed her retreat and brought the center force back into the fight. The human fleet now surrounded the Vraxian column on three sides, pouring fire inward from every direction. For 45 minutes, the crossfire was relentless and systematic. Human gunners targeted engines first, then weapons, then shields, taking apart the Vraxian ships piece by piece. When it was over, the Vraxians had lost 208 ships. Thren's flagship was a drifting wreck, its hull cracked open and leaking atmosphere into space. The surviving Vraxian vessels scattered in every direction, running for home. The field belonged to humanity. On the bridge of the Endurance, Admiral Caldwell received the final reports in silence. 61 human ships had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Over 4,000 human sailors were dead. He read their names on the casualty list, each one a weight added to the burden he carried, and he closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he opened them and gave his next order. Send a message to the Vraxian command frequency. Open channel. No encryption. His communications officer, a young lieutenant named Danny Russo, looked up from his console with wide eyes. Open channel, sir. The entire galaxy will hear it. That's the point, Caldwell said. The message went out, and it was simple. This is Admiral Nate Caldwell of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We have destroyed your forward battle group at the Kasara approach. 22,000 of our people died on Haven's Rest. We are coming for an accounting. You may choose to negotiate, or you may choose to fight. But understand this, we will not stop. The message was heard across Council space. Every species with a communications array picked it up. Recordings of it spread through the galactic information networks within hours, and the effect was like dropping a stone into a still pond. The ripples reached every shore. On the axis of accord, the reaction was a mixture of fear and fascination. The humans had not just fought, they had won, decisively, against a larger, more experienced enemy. The military thinkers among the Council species scrambled to analyze the battle data, and what they found unsettled them more than the victory itself. The humans had not used any secret weapon. Their ships were not faster or stronger than what the Council already knew about. The difference was in how they fought. The coordination between the three groups. The patience of the center force, absorbing punishment while waiting for the trap to close. The precision of the flanking attacks. The willingness to take losses as part of a larger strategy. Every other species in the galaxy had given up war thousands of cycles ago. And when they gave up war, they also gave up the knowledge of how to wage it. They closed their war colleges, deleted their tactical archives, and tried to forget that such things had ever existed. Humans had kept their military schools, their history books full of battles and campaigns, their endless studies of strategy and leadership. They had treated war as a subject worth understanding, even in peacetime, not because they loved it, but because they feared what would happen if they forgot how to do it. Now the galaxy was seeing the result. High Arbiter Solon called another emergency session, but the mood in the chamber had changed. The outrage was still there, but it had been joined by something new. A quiet, creeping fear. The Dravari delegate who had been so loud in condemning humanity was now strangely silent. Several smaller species were whispering among themselves, and the whispers all carried the same question. If the humans could do this to the Vraxians, what could they do to us? It was Dune of the Teresi who rose to speak. The chamber fell silent immediately. The Teresi almost never addressed the full council, and when they did, every species listened. "Fellow delegates," Dune began, his voice old and steady, "I have watched this body react to the human action with shock, then condemnation, and now fear. But I would ask you to consider something that none of us wants to consider. We created a system that promised protection to all member species. When that protection failed the humans, we offered them words. They chose to protect themselves. Can we truly condemn them for doing what we refuse to do?" The chamber erupted into argument. Dune sat down calmly and said nothing more. On Earth, President Laura Hale stood before the United Nations General Assembly. The session was broadcast across every human colony and through various intelligence channels across much of Council space as well. "We did not want this war," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet strength that makes people stop talking and listen. "Every parent who lost a child on Haven's Rest, every family torn apart by that attack, none of them wanted this. But when we asked the galaxy for justice, we were told to wait. When we asked for protection, we were told it was not on the table." She paused and looked directly into the cameras that were sending her words to billions of people and thousands of alien species. "Humanity has always had a complicated relationship with war. We know its cost better than any species in the galaxy because we have paid it over and over throughout our history. We do not celebrate it, but when our people are killed and the universe tells us to be patient, we will not be patient." Her eyes were steady, and her voice did not waver. "We will be relentless." After the victory at the Kessera approach, Admiral Caldwell pushed the fleet deeper into Vraxian-controlled space. President Hale had been very clear about the objective. This was not a war of conquest. Humanity did not want Vraxian territory. They wanted two things: justice for Haven's Rest and a guarantee that it would never happen again. The only way to get both was to hit the Vraxian Dominion hard enough to force them to the table. The campaign that followed lasted 11 weeks, and it became something that military scholars across the galaxy would study for generations. The humans fought with a combination of creative thinking and grinding determination that no living species had ever seen before, because no living species had bothered to remember how war actually worked. The second major engagement came at a Vraxian supply depot orbiting a gas giant called Morath. The depot was massive, a sprawling station that fueled and armed the Vraxian war machine. Without it, the Dominion's ability to sustain a prolonged fight would collapse. Captain Holt planned the attack herself. She took a strike force of fast destroyers and stealth corvettes and approached the depot from the shadow of the gas giant itself, using the planet's massive bulk to hide her ships from the station's sensors. It was a risky approach. The gravitational pull of the gas giant made navigation dangerous, and one wrong calculation could send a ship spiraling into the atmosphere below. But Holt's navigation officers were good, and her timing was precise. The strike force emerged from the planet's shadow less than 50 kilometers from the station and hit it before the defenders could raise their shields. The battle lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, the depot was a shattered ring of burning metal, and the Vraxian supply chain was broken. A young pilot named Chris Langley made a name for himself during that raid. His fighter wing was tasked with punching a hole in the station's shield grid, and when his squadron leader's ship was destroyed in the opening seconds, Chris took over without hesitation. He flew his damaged fighter straight through a gap in the grid, absorbing hits from point defense guns the whole way, and delivered a targeting beacon that guided the final torpedo salvo into the station's reactor core. His fighter was shredded on the way out. The cockpit lost pressure, his flight suit barely held, and he was tumbling through open space when a search and rescue shuttle scooped him up. He woke up in the medical bay of the Endurance, with a broken collarbone, 3 cracked ribs, and a commendation waiting on the table beside his bed. "I don't feel like a hero," he told the medic treating him. a woman named Paula Vance, who had not slept in 30 hours. Heroes usually don't. The third and longest engagement was the Siege of Vren Prime, the Dominion's military command world. This was the heart of the Vraxian war effort, the planet from which every order flowed and every strategy was decided. It was defended by orbital platforms bristling with weapons and a reserve fleet of 300 ships that had been kept back specifically for this purpose. Caldwell knew that a direct assault on Vren Prime would cost him half his fleet. The Vraxians expected a frontal attack. It was all they understood, and they had prepared for it thoroughly. So Caldwell did what humans had done for thousands of years when faced with a strong fortress. He sat down outside it and waited. The siege was a slow, grinding affair. Caldwell positioned his fleet in a wide ring around the planet, cutting every supply line that fed it. Long-range railgun batteries pounded the orbital platforms day after day, methodically chipping away at their defenses. It was not dramatic, it was not fast, but it was effective, and with each passing week, the Vraxians on Vren Prime grew more desperate. It was during the third week of the siege that something unexpected happened. A small group of ships appeared on the fleet's sensors. 12 vessels, unarmed transports, bearing the markings of the Teresi. They were not warships. They carried no weapons at all. Instead, they were loaded with medical supplies, food, engineering equipment, and repair materials. Dune himself was aboard the lead ship. He sent a message to the Endurance. Admiral Caldwell, the Teresi people have watched your struggle. Our ways forbid us from fighting, and we will not break that principle. But we can heal your wounded and repair your ships. Will you accept our help? Caldwell stared at the message for a long time. He had not slept properly in days. His fleet was held together with emergency patches and the stubbornness of exhausted crews. Every day brought new casualty reports, new names to add to the list that he carried in his heart like a stone. Dune, he replied, we accept, and we are grateful. In military terms, 12 unarmed transports did not change the balance of power, but in political terms, the Teresi gesture was an earthquake. One of the oldest and most respected species in the Council had openly sided with humanity. Not with weapons, with something that carried even more weight: legitimacy. Other cracks began to appear in the Council's united front against humanity. The Polani, a species whose colony worlds bordered Vraxian space and who had suffered Vraxian raids for decades without any meaningful Council response, quietly started sharing intelligence with the human fleet. Sensor data, patrol routes, supply schedules. They did it through back channels that could not be easily traced, but everyone knew. Victa, the Kethra peacekeeper commander who had challenged the human fleet at the border checkpoint weeks earlier, resigned from the Peacekeeper Corps. She sent a personal message to Admiral Caldwell that read simply, I joined the Peacekeepers to protect people. The Corps has forgotten how. I hope your species has not. Inside the Council, High Arbiter Solon felt her authority slipping. Delegates who had been loud in condemning humanity were now asking uncomfortable questions in closed sessions. Why had the Council not acted when Haven's Rest was attacked? Why had the Vraxians been allowed to raid border worlds for decades without consequence? How many other species had suffered in silence because the Council's answer to every act of aggression was another committee meeting? How many other species had suffered in silence because the Council's answer to every act of aggression was another committee meeting? Solon did not run from these questions. In a private meeting with her closest advisors, she said what many of them had been thinking. We built a system that depends on everyone following the rules, she said. We never prepared for what happens when someone breaks them. The humans are forcing us to face that failure. One of her advisors, an Aileron named Tassara, spoke carefully. High Arbiter, several delegations are privately suggesting that we offer the humans some form of support. Not military support, but a formal statement recognizing that their action was justified under the circumstances. Solon was quiet for a long time. The weight of what Tessara was suggesting was enormous. If the Council recognized humanity's war as justified, it would mean admitting that the Council itself had failed, that the system Solon had spent her entire career defending was flawed. If we do that, she said slowly, we admit that our system does not work. High Arbiter, it did not work. 22,000 people are dead because it did not work. Solon closed her eyes. When she opened them, her expression had changed. Not softened exactly, but something had shifted behind it, like a wall developing a crack. Draft a resolution, she said. We will put it before the Council. Back at Vren Prime, the siege entered its 6th week. The Vraxian defenses were crumbling, but so was the human fleet. Caldwell had lost another 31 ships and over 2,000 more sailors since the siege began. His surviving vessels were battered and patched. His crews were running on short sleep and shorter tempers. The Teresi medical ships were full of wounded. Late one evening, Caldwell sat alone in his quarters aboard the Endurance, reading the latest casualty list. Every name was someone's child. Every name was someone who had been alive that morning and was not alive now. He read each one carefully, because he believed he owed them that much. Captain Holt found him there an hour later, still reading. Admiral, you need to sleep, she said from the doorway. I know. He did not look up. She stepped inside and sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ship hummed quietly around them, the sound of systems running, of a vessel holding itself together through sheer engineering and willpower. Megan, he said finally, do you think we are doing the right thing? She thought about it. She did not rush to answer, because the question deserved more than a quick response. I think 22,000 people on Haven's Rest did not get to ask that question, she said. So we are asking it for them. And I think that matters. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's about where I've landed too, he said. He put the list down, stood up, and looked out the viewport at the distant glow of Vren Prime hanging in the darkness. Somewhere down there, Vraxian commanders were making decisions of their own. He wondered if any of them were reading casualty lists too. He wondered if it weighed on them the way it weighed on him. Then he turned away from the window and went to get some sleep, because tomorrow the siege would continue, and his people needed him awake. The end of the war did not come with a single dramatic moment. It came the way most wars end, with a slow convergence of pressures that the losing side could no longer withstand. On the military front, the siege of Vren Prime had strangled the Vraxian Dominion's ability to coordinate its forces. Caldwell's patient bombardment had destroyed 60% of the orbital defense platforms, and the supply blockade had left the reserve fleet critically short of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. Vraxian ships that had once been proud warships were now sitting in orbit with half their systems powered down to conserve energy. On the political front, something even more significant had happened. The Galactic Council passed Resolution 7712 by a vote of 312 to 61. The resolution formally recognized that humanity's military action was a legitimate response to an unprovoked act of aggression against a member world. It was the first time in the entire history of the Council that a species' use of force had been officially sanctioned, even after the fact. High Arbiter Solan read the resolution to the Assembly herself. Those who knew her well said there was something new in her voice when she spoke the words. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of respect that had not been there before. The Vraxian leadership, facing a war they had never planned for, against an enemy they had badly misjudged, and now cut off from any sympathy in the wider galaxy, finally did what Caldwell had been waiting for. They sent a communication requesting terms. Admiral Caldwell brought President Hale into the negotiation through a quantum communication link. For 3 days, human and Vraxian representatives argued back and forth over the details. The terms that humanity demanded were straightforward but firm. Full financial reparations for the attack on Haven's Rest. The surrender of every Vraxian military commander who had been involved in ordering or carrying out the strike. A demilitarized zone along the border between human and Vraxian space, wide enough to prevent any future surprise attack. And a formal apology, broadcast on every communication channel in the galaxy, for every species to hear. The Vraxians pushed back. They argued over the size of the reparations. They refused to hand over their commanders. They complained that the demilitarized zone was too wide. But they were negotiating from weakness, and every person in the room knew it. In the end, they accepted every major term. The reparations were set. The commanders were surrendered. The buffer zone was established. The apology was written, approved, and scheduled for broadcast. The Treaty of Kessera, named for the site of the first battle, was signed aboard the Endurance in a simple ceremony. There were no grand decorations, no flags, no music, just a plain metal table in the ship's briefing room, 2 chairs, and a document. Admiral Caldwell sat on one side. The Vraxian envoy, a scarred military governor named Drek, sat on the other. Drek was an old soldier who had fought in more campaigns than he cared to remember. He had lost friends and ships in this war, and the sting of defeat was written into every line on his heavy face. He pressed his mark to the treaty, then looked across the table at Caldwell, with an expression that held resentment, exhaustion, and something that might have been grudging respect, all mixed together in a way that was hard to separate. "Your species is young," Drek said, "but you fight like something old, something we should have seen coming." Caldwell met his gaze. His own face was tired, his eyes carrying the weight of every casualty report he had read over the past months. "We didn't want to fight at all," he said quietly. "Remember that." Drek held his gaze for a moment longer, then rose from his chair and walked out of the room without another word. His shuttle departed the Endurance 10 minutes later, carrying the signed treaty back to Vren Prime. In the days that followed, the human fleet began the long journey home. The ships were in rough shape, hulls scarred with plasma burns, armor plates cracked and hastily welded, systems running on backup power. Because the primary generators had been shot out weeks ago, they looked less like a victorious fleet and more like a collection of things that had no business still flying. But they were flying, and they were going home. The fleet had lost 89 vessels over the course of the campaign. Over 7,000 human sailors were dead. It was the highest price humanity had paid in a single conflict since the old wars on Earth centuries before. President Laura Hale met the fleet when it arrived back in Sol space. She boarded the Endurance and walked through its corridors slowly, stopping to talk with crew members, shaking hands, listening to their stories. A mechanic told her about keeping the port engine running with spare parts improvised from kitchen equipment. A gunner told her about the friend he had lost at the Kessera approach. A medic told her about the day the Teresi ships arrived and how the entire medical bay had gone quiet with relief. Hale listened to all of it. She did not rush anyone. She did not look at her watch or check her schedule. She simply listened, because she believed these people had earned that much and more. When she reached the bridge, she found Caldwell standing at the viewport, looking down at the blue curve of Earth below. He looked older than he had 3 months ago. The lines on his face were deeper, and there was a stillness about him that came from having carried something very heavy for a very long time. "It's done, Nate," she said. He nodded slowly. "The fighting is. The rest is just beginning." He was right. The war was over, but its effects had only started to spread. The Galactic Council, shaken to its core by everything that had happened, began a thorough reform of its own systems. A new mutual defense provision was added to the accord, one with real enforcement mechanisms instead of promises and committees. For the first time, the Council created a rapid response force that could actually be deployed to protect member worlds under attack. Several species that had spent decades complaining about the Council's passivity suddenly found themselves being listened to. The Teresi, whose quiet support had helped shift galactic opinion at a crucial moment, became humanity's closest allies. Thune traveled to Earth personally, the first Teresi to ever do so, and spent several weeks studying human history. He visited museums and universities and battlefields, and he talked to soldiers and teachers and farmers and children. He was fascinated by humanity's long and painful relationship with conflict. Humans did not hide from their history of war. They did not pretend it had not happened. Instead, they studied it, argued about it, wrote about it, and used it to build systems of justice that, while imperfect, kept getting better. They carried the weight of their violent past not as a badge of pride, but as a responsibility. "You are a strange species," Thune told Ambassador Kevin Park one evening over dinner in Geneva. The mountains were visible through the restaurant windows, snow-capped and ancient. You build order with one hand and carry fire in the other. It is frightening, but I think, perhaps, it is also necessary. We have been trying to figure ourselves out for about 10,000 years. I will let you know if we ever manage it. On the axis of accord, a new monument was built in the Central Assembly Chamber. It was not a celebration of the war. It was not a statue of a hero or a depiction of a battle. It was a simple stone column with an inscription carved into it in every language represented in the Council. Protection that exists only in words is no protection at all. High Arbiter Solon unveiled the monument in a brief ceremony. As she stepped back, she noticed the human delegation watching from the gallery above. Ambassador Park stood among them, his face thoughtful and still. Solon had spent her entire career believing that peace meant the absence of conflict, that if nobody fought, then everything was working as it should. The humans had shown her something harder to accept. Peace without justice was just silence, and silence could hide terrible things. A system that kept its members quiet while they suffered was not a system of peace. It was a system of comfortable neglect. She would not forget that lesson. Admiral Caldwell retired from active service 6 months after the fleet returned to Sol. He moved to a small town in Vermont, surrounded by green hills and quiet roads. He spent his days reading, walking in the woods, and writing letters to the families of sailors who had died under his command. He did not give interviews. He did not write a memoir. When people asked him about the war, he would simply say that a lot of good people had done hard things because they had to, and that was the whole story. Captain Megan Holt was promoted to admiral and given command of the rebuilt and expanded Earth Defense Fleet. She threw herself into the work with the same focused intensity she had brought to every battle, designing new ships, training new crews, and building a force that would make anyone think twice before threatening a human world again. Her philosophy was simple. The best way to prevent the next war was to make sure anyone considering one knew exactly what they would face. Chris Langley, the young pilot who had flown through the shield grid at Morath, went home to Colorado. He went back to school, studied engineering, and helped design the next generation of human fighters. Years later, when a reporter asked him about his experience in the war, he shrugged. "I did what needed doing," he said. "A lot of people did. Most of them don't have their names in any article. That's the real story." And humanity, loud, emotional, stubborn, complicated humanity, went on doing what it had always done. It argued with itself. It built things, and broke them, and built them better. It dreamed big dreams, and made terrible mistakes, and got up the next morning to try again. It carried the memory of its 7,000 dead, not as a wound to be hidden, but as a reminder of what it had cost to stand up when the galaxy told them to sit down. The galaxy watched, as it always had, with that familiar mixture of fascination and unease. Because now, every species in the Council knew something about the youngest member of their community, something the Vraxians had learned in blood and fire, and something that the rest of the galaxy would not forget for a very long time. Humanity did not want war. They never had. They hoped they never would again. But if war came to their door, they would meet it standing up, with open eyes and steady hands. They would pay whatever price it demanded. They would hold the line as long as it needed holding. And they would not stop until it was finished. The Galactic Council had kept peace among 400 species for nearly 12,000 cycles. Every civilization that joined the Council accepted one rule above all others. No species shall wage war upon another. Disputes were settled through talking, through trade penalties, or in the worst cases, exile from Council space. War was seen as something primitive, something that belonged to the past. The Council believed it had evolved beyond such things, and for a very long time, it seemed like they were right. Humanity had been a provisional member of the Council for only 47 cycles. In the eyes of the elder species, humans were young and noisy and far too emotional for their own good. But they had followed every rule. They had signed every treaty. They had kept their warships parked in their home system as required. The Council tolerated them, the way a group of old professors might tolerate a loud student who still turned in his homework on time. That tolerance was about to be tested in a way nobody expected. The Vraxian Dominion was not a member of the Council. They were an empire from the outer rim of the galaxy, aggressive and territorial, known for raiding border worlds and disappearing before anyone could respond. The Council had tried diplomacy with them several times over the centuries and had gotten nowhere. But the Vraxians had never attacked a Council member world directly. Until now. Haven's Rest was a small human colony on the edge of Council-protected space. 60,000 people lived there, mostly farmers and miners and their families. It was a quiet place, the kind of world where people moved to raise their children away from the noise of the bigger colonies. It had no military value. It had no strategic importance. It was just a place where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. The Vraxians hit it without warning. Their fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the middle of the night, local time, and began bombarding the surface before the colony's tiny defense station could even power up its shields. They glassed half the planet in under 6 hours. 22,000 people died, men, women, and children, before a distress signal even reached Earth. When the message arrived at the United Earth Defense Command on Luna, Admiral Nate Caldwell was the first to read it. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with gray eyes and a calm voice that had steadied many rooms over his long career. But as he read the report, something cold and heavy settled in his chest. He contacted Earth's president, Laura Hale, immediately. They hit Haven's Rest, he told her over encrypted channels. Real bad. Laura Hale had spent 10 years working inside the Council's bureaucracy before becoming president. She understood how the Council worked better than almost any human alive. She knew what would happen next. The Council would call a session, the delegates would argue for months, committees would be formed, reports would be written, and the Vraxians would use that time to dig in or strike again. She had seen it happen before with other species. The Council's greatest strength was patience. Its greatest weakness was the same thing. She closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she opened them. "Get me a line to the Council chamber," she said. "And Nate, start waking up the fleet." The Council session was called within the day. The holographic assembly chamber, on the great station known as the Axis of Accord, filled with representatives from dozens of species. High Arbiter Solon, a tall and graceful figure from the ancient Aluran species, presided over the gathering with her usual air of calm detachment. She had led the council for decades, and had never encountered a crisis she could not manage with the right combination of patience and procedure. The human delegation was led by Ambassador Kevin Park, a sharp and careful man who had earned quiet respect among several council members over his years of service. He was not flashy. He did not raise his voice. He simply laid out facts with a precision that was hard to argue with. He stood at the petitioner's platform and presented the evidence plainly. The attack, the death toll, the sensor data confirming Vraxian origin. When he finished, he made his request. We ask the Council to authorize a joint defensive action against the Vraxian Dominion under Article 17 of the Mutual Protection Accord. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then the murmuring began. The Dravari delegate, a massive figure named Gorath, rumbled something about hasty conclusions. The Kethra representative clicked her mandibles and suggested sending a diplomatic envoy. One delegate after another urged patience, restraint, and further investigation. It was the same song the council had been singing for thousands of cycles, and every note of it landed on Kevin Park like a stone. High Arbiter Solon finally spoke. The council acknowledges the tragedy suffered by the human colony. We will dispatch a fact-finding commission and open dialogue with the Vraxian Dominion. Military action is, of course, not on the table. Kevin Park stared at her for a long, heavy moment. The chamber was silent. Several delegates later said they felt something shift in that silence, though none of them can say exactly what it was. I understand, Kevin said quietly. I will relay your decision to my government. He left the chamber without another word. A few delegates noticed that his hands were clenched tight at his sides. Back on Luna, President Hale listened to the recording of the session. Her face showed nothing, but Caldwell, who had known her for 20 years, could see the decision forming behind her eyes, like a storm building on a clear horizon. They won't help, she said. It was not a question. No, ma'am. She was quiet for a while. Through the wide viewport of her office, the blue curve of Earth filled the darkness like a promise. Down there, millions of people were going about their lives, not yet knowing what had happened to their brothers and sisters on Haven's Rest. Not yet knowing what was about to change. How long until the Third Fleet is operational? She asked. 72 hours. The 7th and 9th can follow within the week. Laura Hale thought about the families on Haven's Rest. She thought about the Council's fact-finding commission, which would take months to assemble, and more months to reach any conclusion. She thought about every time in human history when someone had been told to wait, to be patient, to trust the system, and the system had done nothing. She stood up from her chair. Do it, she said. Activate all reserve fleets. Recall every vessel from deep patrol. Put every shipyard on war footing. Caldwell nodded once. He had expected this. Part of him had hoped for it. And Nate, she added, her voice steady and clear, draft a message to the Council. Tell them we appreciate their consideration. Tell them humanity has made its decision. She looked him in the eye. We choose war. The words moved through the chain of command like electricity through a wire. Within hours, every human military installation in the solar system was alive with activity. Ships that had sat idle for years were being powered up, armed, and crewed. Reservists who had never expected to see real combat were pulling on their uniforms and reporting for duty. And across the galaxy, on the axis of Accord, the delegates of 400 species were about to learn something that would shake their civilization to its core. That the loud, emotional, reckless young species they had barely tolerated had just done something no one had done in 3,000 cycles. Humanity had chosen war, and the galaxy would never be the same.